The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. There's a cloud of uncertainty hanging over many smaller media outlets around Vancouver Island and beyond. A federally funded program to support civic journalism in underserved communities is set to expire at the end of next month. There's been no definitive answer one way or another about its future. Called the Local Journalism Initiative, or LJI, it provides funds to a number of not-for-profit organizations representing different segments of the news industry. For example, there's one for print media and one for community radio. Those larger organizations administer the funding, giving money to news organizations who hire journalists. CHLY's nonprofit newsroom receives Local Journalism Initiative funding for our news updates. Midcoast Morning is funded through a separate program. The ambiguity around the LJI's future has left more than 400 journalists across the country unsure whether or not they'll have jobs come April. Today on the show, we'll hear from two of them about the impacts of the situation both personally and for the communities they serve. Lonnie Taylor has been reporting on Cortes Island through the Local Journalism Initiative.
My name is Lonnie Taylor, and I am a radio news journalist for CKTZ Cortes Community Radio, and I reside on Cortes Island. I've been working with the LJI since April of 2022.
And do you know what you're going to be doing come April of 2024?
I don't know yet, but I am actively seeking work. I'm interested in continuing in radio. This has been an introduction to radio for me in a lot of ways, and I've really enjoyed it. I'd love to continue in other realms, not just, civic news, but arts, entertainment, science, podcasting. But I also have a pretty diverse background, and living on Cortes Island, a place of 1,200 people, you really have to have a dynamic approach to work and how to make a living. So I've always had multiple jobs, and I'm actually in the process of relocating to the Comox Valley. So I'm quite confident I will find work in some avenue, if not multiple options. So
if the LJI funding was guaranteed to continue and you wouldn't have to stop doing this, would you be happy to keep going?
Yeah, I think I would. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been a really empowering opportunity, and it has a lot of a lot of freedom to explore and learn about new topics in the region. So yeah, I'd absolutely continue it. It's an incredibly stable career for Cortes Island. But yeah, like I said, in my own personal mental well-being, it's better for me to assume, what seems to be at this point pretty inevitable, that there isn't going to be funding. And I do have experience in the nonprofit realm, and grants, having any programs relying specifically on grants, in my opinion and experience, is not a sustainable system. Grants are great for kickstarting programs and getting them off the ground. But if that program is not designed to have multiple forms of revenue and energy and support that is just naturally generated through the design, then it doesn't have a sustainable design, in my opinion. So I think I always kind of knew that this was an impermanent setup.
Can you tell me about some of the stories that you've worked on in your coming up on 2 years of time with the LJI?
Yeah, well, I think I've had the most fun interviewing scientists, biologists, conservationists, people involved in that aspect of our community, because we're living in a rainforest, and on Cortes Island we really enjoy endangered species and threatened species, and quite a diversity of ecologies. So what's currently, happening with these ecologies and these animals and these systems that completely are affected by our actions, but also we are affected by the way these ecologies are functioning or not functioning. So I love learning more about that and talking to, local experts that are, really up to date on what's currently happening in those realms.
Is there anyone else that's currently doing that on Cortez Island?
So there is another journalist that works on Cortez Island for the radio station, but also kind of independently has their own gig. And it's just one individual, but he does also, I don't really understand where he gets funding, but he does have people contribute in the community. And I don't know how to describe exactly the format or programming because I'm not super familiar with it. I was offered to contribute to Cortez Currents, but it isn't sustainable livelihood for me. It's not the same, compensation that the LJI is able to offer. So it just isn't sustainable. But I think that will continue. It's completely independent of the LJI. I don't know, what the longevity of that is, just because it is really just one person that drives it. And again, that from a programming perspective, you really need multiple sources of energy to make something long-term sustainable.
If the LJI funding doesn't get renewed, if Cortez Island loses a substantial portion of this kind of local radio news, what do you think will be lost other than, 4 stories every week or whatever it is?
I think overall awareness as to what's going on in the community, especially a rural community that is isolated in a lot of ways. It's community members that are listening to the radio. That might be the only human voices they really listen to every single day. And I think that connection, community through the arts, through these streams is extremely important to our mental health and well-being. And I know that a lot of the programming that I cover, and it's a huge source of media that the community digests, and without it, they'll be limited to more digital online sources, and that is limited. And again, a lot of that is really limited because it's only being sourced by one person, and a lot of times it's just a community member volunteering their time. So I don't see long-term sustainability in that. And it's proven to be the case. A lot of the stories that I've done have been about programming on Cortez Island that has lost its funding and therefore had to close its doors and end. So it's, I think it is a result of grant-funded programming, but also this mentality that if you want to do something good for the community, you got to do it for free. And, that's not sustainable. That also results in volunteer exhaustion and burnout and, again, mental health, struggles. So, yeah, I do think that it will affect the community and it'll affect the radio station, but we also have very resourceful support at the radio station seeking other sources for income and other ways to do this. But it is a largely volunteer-based entity. And I think that that'll probably continue and continue to be a shoestring struggle.
Do you think, so you mentioned earlier on in the conversation that there was maybe an opportunity for you to contribute to the kind of one other Cortez media outlet, but it isn't the kind of thing that could help someone make a living. Do you think in a community of, as you mentioned, 1,200-ish people, that it is possible to kind of from private sources cobble together a good living to make news? Or do you think grant funding is kind of integral to making that happen?
I think that grant funding is integral to making a lot of things happen on Cortez, especially just in rural communities. I think that is absolutely the case. We just don't get the resources that larger communities do. And I think that, again, the real struggle is this mentality that if you're doing something good for the community, you should be doing it for free. You shouldn't be expecting to make a livelihood from it. And that's just not sustainable, especially when I think that opinion is coming from a population of people that don't work, that are retired and living on pensions. So I think that it's definitely possible. Radio is supposed to be advertising based, right? Like that's how it has worked in the past. And I think if the mentality changes in the community, that's okay to do, that we can charge people to advertise and create revenue so that we can pay someone to do local news and entertainment, that could work. Yeah, I think it's more challenging to convince the masses and the board members that is moral to do it that way. And I also think that podcasting has a lot of potential now that it really has become an established form of media, that's a slightly different framework and could definitely work for Cortez. And I do see potential there. And I think that we have a lot of talented people that can, put those pieces together and find a way that we might be able to produce news that's not just local and relevant, but could also be really intriguing for a larger regional audience. And in a lot of ways, the LJI was kind of, coming up with that concept, because all of our stories are on, a countrywide website that is sharing news from all over Canada.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to this conversation today?
I think that radio is awesome. And as we see news itself really declining over all these years, especially printed news and newspapers and that whole story, I think that radio absolutely has the potential to not only survive, but really thrive in this new, more digital realm that we have available to us. Working from home has been an absolutely beautiful experience and really empowered me to get a lot of other things done in my personal life. So I think that if it was just a Kickstarter to something greater or many other things, then that's great. And I'm an optimist, so I'm looking at it in that way. And I really think that there's a lot of potential out there in ways that we can harness audio as an art and as a method of sharing stories.
Lonnie Taylor is a radio journalist for CKTZ on Cortez Island. She's been in the role since April 2022. Funding for her position is set to expire at the end of next month.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
Today on the show, we're focusing on uncertainty around the future of several local journalism projects on and around the island. A federal funding program to produce news in underserved communities is set to expire at the end of March. It's called the Local Journalism Initiative, or LJI, and as of recording, there's been no definitive word one way or the other about whether or not it will be renewed. There are more than 400 positions impacted nationwide, including several within our broadcast range, with outlets such as the Gabriola Sounder, the Discourse Comox Valley, and the Tyee. Also impacted is a relatively new project on Gabriola Island under the supervision of Frank Moore.
My name is Frank Moore. I am the project supervisor for the Life on Gabriola Media Society of our Life on Gabriola TV Local Journalism Initiative project, which we started last summer And as with the other LJI projects in the country, we know we are continuing through March 31st, but the future is dim beyond that.
Yeah, I'm curious especially about that aspect of it, that you just started this last summer. It's still, I think, fair to say, a relatively recent thing. What is it like to be facing that level of uncertainty so soon?
Well, I was just happy that we got to start the project at all. I was kind of surprised when we succeeded because we are administered by an organization which is responsible, whose roots are with community television in Canada, going back a very long time. We're not a TV station of any kind, including a community TV station. All our product is going online. It goes first on Facebook, which was our pitch in our application, is instead of making people come to us, we'll go to where people already are. So we post our content on the three main Facebook pages for Gabriola. We post it to YouTube, and that's for purposes of it ending up eventually on the national portal maintained by the funder Cactus for all the projects, all the video journalism projects that are happening under this banner in Canada. So we are kind of a new media spin-off of what has been happening historically in Canada and with this particular local journalism initiative. So I was glad to get to do it at all. Of course, I do think it serves the community. I do think it serves democracy. And I do think it serves to try to help save media in Canada to be doing these projects. So I hope they all continue past March 31st.
Can you give me a sense of some of the stories or topics you've been able to cover so far?
Right. So we chose in the first instance, it's called Life on Gabriola TV. And we chose in the first instance to have a very tight focus on Gabriola Island as a way of sort of finding our feet. So we have covered in a sustained way the topic last summer. We covered the danger of wildfires during a especially dry summer, especially on an island. We talked with the fire chief and others about that. We have more recently looked at the situation with healthcare, and there we started to branch out more generally into topics apropos the central Vancouver Island area generally, including, of course, Gabriola Island. And so we have sort of started to feel our way out into a kind of broader area of coverage now. But for the most part, we are hyper-local. We have done a lot in support of Gabriola Island artists when they have gigs upcoming. And we just want to contribute to the conversation in our community.
And you mentioned off the top that part of the pitch for this was to be a bit different from maybe a traditional media platform, a traditional newspaper or radio station. How have you found that that's been working so far?
I think it works really well for these projects. So my background is primarily in or at least was originally in print journalism, writing for newspapers and magazines. And then when I taught at VIU, because my students were interested in video journalism, I had to become interested and also learn something about it as well. So up at VIU, I taught a course called Digital Storytelling, which included nonfiction journalistic projects. So I have found what we are doing with Life on Gabriola TV analogous to the kind of work I used to do in magazines, which is this. It's not so much spot news reporting. The Gabriola Sounder, the newspaper on Gabriola, which is also a beneficiary of the local journalism initiative, does, the news. We are doing stuff that is sort of more broadly based, more thematic based, and we sort of look after the fact sometimes at issues and events. So, for example, I'll give you a very specific example. There was, shockingly on Gabriola, a home invasion a number of months ago on a farm on the island, which is occupied by a beloved couple who have been here and raised their family here starting in the 1940s. Now, Gabriel is not immune to what's going on in the world at large, but this took the community by surprise and unsettled the community for sure. And there were a lot of questions left in its wake, not only about what happened, but also the way in which the RCMP responded to it, and the information the RCMP provided in its wake. So we went and we talked to the local constabulary, to the local corporal, and asked some questions that I had and that I think others shared on the island. And in doing that follow-up, I think we were able to both reassure the island and also not contribute to an atmosphere of fear. In fact, I think we helped to sort of settle things down a little bit.
If the LJI funding is not renewed, does that just kind of disappear? Is there a way for this to go on in some kind of other format or with other revenue sources?
I don't think so. Not with our project. Our project, we formed a society, the Life on Gabriola Media Society, specifically to receive the funding from the local journalism initiative. We were required to do so. So we are constituted in order to do this project. It is certainly the lion's share of our revenue. And no, I don't. There is a society that exists. It could do other things as well. But offhand, I don't see this particular project surviving if the funding does not continue.
And you shared that one example. Is that, do you think, indicative of what would be lost if the project isn't there? Just the opportunity for kind of larger form follow-up on stories impacting Gabriola? Yeah,
absolutely. Again, the Gabriola Sounder does a good job of reporting the news. I think we complement them well. I think that sort of filling in at the edges and filling in some blanks and having the ability. So we do a lot of long form video journalism. Much of our stuff, runs an hour or more. We also go out and, of course, record events and speakers that are on the island. So we're doing stuff that is complementary to traditional news gathering. There was no one else doing it before we began to do so, and I don't know of an organization that would fill in that blank. We've also worked with organizations on the island to amplify what they're doing. So by going out and videoing their events or creating a broader platform for their own work with, say, video recordings of what they do. In particular, we were able to take a series created by a group on the island called People for a Healthy Community, one of the most important, significant nonprofits on the island, in my view. They had created this series in August, and it was about health and well-being on the island. It did not get a huge viewership when they first posted it on their YouTube page. We reposted the episodes, all 10 episodes in the series, and we're able to draw a much larger viewership to what I thought was an extremely good and valuable series. So we are also able to amplify the video efforts of some of the organizations on the island too.
Is there anything else you think it's important to bring to this conversation today?
I would just like to point out that media in Canada is dying. That while the recent announcement that Google would be putting an infusion into it, Meta notably will not and continues to be an impediment, in my view, to democracy in Canada. The news that Google would put money in, $100 million, was welcome. Whether that will reach small organizations like us or like you, we're not sure, I don't think yet. But we are in crisis, and we need to recognize that if something isn't done, we're going to be awash in YouTube videos. And I think most of us know those are not terribly reliable sources of information, if they're sources of information at all. Primarily, they're sources of opinion and polemic. News is going away. Journalism is going away. And if we want it to survive, well, I thank the people who 5 years ago had the foresight to come up with the local journalism initiative to try to remedy some of what was happening and which we see happening now at an accelerating pace. So that's all. If we want media, we got to do something to save it.
On that front, before I let you go, what maybe do you feel separates the videos that you're creating with what you describe there as YouTube videos that could just be folks' opinions?
Right. Well, our agenda is to provide information. It is not to convince you of something. It is not to inflame you. It is not to draw clicks. It is to provide information. And in my view, that is primarily what distinguishes us from the bulk of content on YouTube and other social media platforms. Unless, of course, it's the output of a media organization, which, people need to be media literate. Media organizations do, mainstream ones, traditional ones, do often come from a political point of view. People need to be media literate so that they know that fact. Maybe they understand what political point of view this particular mainstream outlet is coming from, not that all do. So you have to equip yourself to be a sophisticated consumer of media. But in the case of the Life on Gabriola TV, the Life on Gabriola Media Society, our agenda is Gabriola. That's it. And I think that is a valuable sort of balance to bring to the conversation.
Well, Frank, thank you very much for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks for the stuff you guys are doing over there.
Frank Moore is the project supervisor for the Life on Gabriola TV Local Journalism Initiative project. Its future is up in the air, along with more than 400 journalism positions across Canada, because funding from the Local Journalism Initiative is set to expire at the end of March. As of recording, there's been no word one way or the other on whether or not it will be renewed. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.